Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we're addressing the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. Join us each week as we spark a midlife renewal and create a firm foundation for the next wonderful, exciting, awesome season of life.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. It's great to be here with you. I'm Curtis and I'm here with Karen.
Hi, everyone. Happy middle of the Lenten season to you.
Happy mid-Lent. Say, Karen, we got a listener comment. Lady says, my husband and I have been listening to your podcast. We're very impressed. We started with the episode, How to Talk to Your Young Adult, and used some of your advice right away. I felt great about my approach, even if my daughter didn't know what I was doing.
Sneaky.
We look forward to listening more, and especially to your recent episodes on marriage. So the young adult season, that started with episode 14, and the marriage season started with episode 51. Most of all, we want to thank our listener for taking a few moments to let us know what's landing, what's working, and her thoughts and comments.
Yeah, it's great to know. And here we are in the forgiveness season. So last week we talked a little bit about some of the themes and theology around forgiveness. And today we're going to address what is this we're talking about anyway? What even is this, and why would we want to do it?
Why do we want to forgive?
It can be hard to feel motivated sometimes to dig into this whole process. The thing is, our kingdom, it's a kingdom of reconciliation. And there's tremendous power in that. There is power in the reconciliation of God. There's power for your own internal process, and it has these amazing ripple effects in the world. Right now, this is how God is working out reconciliation. He's done his work in Christ, and he's giving to us this grace to be the image of his forgiveness in the world. If we're in the image of God, we're the image of the reconciling God in the world. And this is how reconciliation is present now. He's asking us as the image bearers to be the reconciling force in the world.
Wow, we are his emissaries.
That's a great word for it.
You know, I always think, boy, he could have chose somebody else, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's somebody better than me to be doing this.
Yeah, but we're his instruments. So there you go.
Yeah.
So Karen, when it comes to forgiveness, I mean, every situation determines the how and the details because there's complexity to it. But there's so much possibility for transformation by entering into God's forgiveness. And at least I tend to think of it on a very individualistic level, but let's not lose sight of the big picture, the transformative effect on many people that forgiveness can have. For instance, I think of Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the South African Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And there's a reason that process of bringing both sides forward to confess their crimes and to share the atrocities visited upon them and upon their loved ones. This is a process that was mixed, but it was transformative, and it was an alternative to continued cycles of violence. He said that, Bishop Tutu said, he was guided by the Christian philosophy, but also the African philosophy of the Ubuntu. My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together.
Wow. That's really a beautiful thought. And it makes me think about how central relationships are to being human. to being in this world. And there's all this complexity to relationships, and you have to kind of do it right to restore them and reconcile them in a healthy and functional way. And it's available to us. It's available to us to restore relationships, and the power of the kingdom in that is here.
Yeah, and part of being in the kingdom, it's available to us. There's a lot of grace available to us. It's not easy.
No.
We were talking about this, and you said, boy, this is like John chapter 6, verse 66, where Jesus is sharing all this words about the bread of life, and I am the bread of life, and you're going to chew on my body like a cow. And oh man, people started leaving. They said, oh, this has been a great kingdom, but I'm going to find a different kingdom.
I'm going to go wait and see what the next prophet has to say.
Let's find the
this
next
is not
prophet.
For me. It's true. It's true that there's part of us that are like, man, I don't know if this is the kingdom for me. And it can kind of be like that with forgiveness. So there's this, this inner transformation of learning how to be that, how to conform ourselves to that. And it takes some effort. On a personal level, it's pretty much impossible to deny the power of forgiveness, the positive power of forgiveness. And there's all tons of research around this. People who know how to forgive and know how to forgive habitually, they're happier, they're physically healthier, they have less stress, they have better relationships. And I'm really thinking of this kind of extreme story of a friend of mine who his kids were basically seriously harmed by a family member. And it was an extremely stressful situation. And he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you are going to have a stroke or a heart attack if you don't do something, because this is taking its toll on your body. And so what he did is he did a forgiveness process. And the words he used afterward were, forgiving saved my life. It saved my life. Something was going to happen if I didn't release everything that I was carrying around with me in my body. And this is true. Unforgiveness has pretty intense physical and emotional consequences for our own well-being.
Yeah, forgiveness, when we can stop letting somebody else determine what my experience is going to be, who I'm going to be, the kind of life I'm going to have, then we know we're there.
Right. What's that quote? When I can think of the person and let them pass through my thoughts with ease.
Yeah, you can pass through your thoughts and you don't get caught up in that cycle of angst.
Yeah, and reactivity. So I know everybody has these definitions of forgiveness. I haven't really found any of them to be satisfying or really sufficient. So I kind of want just to tell our listeners what's happening in forgiveness. Like, what are you even doing in some forgiveness process that's helping you?
Well, I agree. I approach the forgiveness work. For instance, I got one of these forgiveness prayers, and it was great. I did the forgiveness prayer. I did it, a number of times, and it was this big stew of emotional and spiritual and prayer and even the psychological. This is a very sort of traditional, if there's such a thing as a traditional healing prayer in the Catholic Church, but something that's been around for a long time. It's highly respected, and it's very complicated.
Well, one question is, what's going on right now? If you have things in your life that you haven't let go of, and people or situations you haven't forgiven. And sometimes it's really apparent to you. like when you think of a situation or event, you get certain emotions, negative, the anger, the stress, the resentment, the frustration, and you have this stress reaction in your body. And all those familiar thought patterns surface. And maybe you start even to ruminate and get caught up in what was wrong and how it should be and what the other person did. And then your body can often be in this kind of stress reactive state.
Yeah, my thoughts can start churning as I remember that situation, and my focus is zooming in, and I'm thinking those same things, and I'm getting carried away. So physiologically, I'm having this stress reaction. I usually feel it in my kind of abdomen. I'm tensing up, and my cortisol shoots up. My blood vessels are constricting, and my body starts to shut down some of my higher cognitive functions because it's getting ready. It knows a threat when it sees it, right? And so it's under threat. It's getting me ready to fight or flight. And boy, at this point, I'm really stuck because now I don't have a way to break out of that. Mm-hmm. I have to calm down. I have to find my peace around in my life before I can go back into all of that situation and start to even think about getting some forgiveness done.
Right. People who do the forgiveness work really do highlight this point that when you're in that fight or flight stress reactive state, that's not the place where you can find forgiveness. You don't have the access to the parts of you that forgive when you're there.
So it's funny that you brought up the stress reaction approach to lack of forgiveness, because that's more me. But the more you approach is, just move on, kind of forget about it.
Oh, yeah.
Don't dwell on the harm. Don't name it. And you're not experiencing all the negativity, Karen. You don't get into the anger and hate. You just don't do that.
Well, I don't.
But it's costing you.
Yeah. That's the thing is some of us are a personality of just move on, release, forgive and forget. And we don't stop to really consider, where's the undercurrent here? Maybe I don't have the big negativity, but are there things I'm missing that I need to release and really forgive? And in that case, there's a freedom that I'm not accessing because I'm not doing that.
You're missing the freedom. And frankly, this kind of approach is what I see a lot in kind of your higher powered white collar executives that are used to just taking everything in stride, and they're not going to dwell on a lot of past problems or conflicts because they go through a lot of them. And sometimes their emotional response is dialed down so low that it's bleeding over into other areas of their life. And it's hard for them to even think big about what they want, what they could do in their life, or how they could be more available to those around them.
Sure. And the positive part of some of those negative emotions is that they give you information about what's really going on. And so we don't want to pass over them or miss them. We want to pay attention to what they're telling us about
They're
our
so
life.
chancy, though. They can grab us and carry us away. And that's part of the trick or the process, is to receive the information and to have the emotion and then be able to set it aside.
So how do you think you know when you've made the shift into forgiveness?
Well, like we were saying, the situation can start to play through your mind without arousing a strong response. I mean, in forgiveness, you're able to release the toxic emotions, and you're getting back to your place of interior peace, which is where you live as a Christian. Your life and your happiness, they're not dictated by that event or person, and you're experiencing interior freedom. It's freedom to be more, to do more.
Right. So you're not held captive by what's happened in the past in many ways.
And I'd like our listeners to pause for a moment and just think about, well, how are we doing for interior peace? And forgiveness isn't the only thing, but it's a factor. It's an important factor in being able to find your interior freedom. You're a son, you're a daughter of God. And what role does forgiveness have to play for you in achieving and grasping, or rather, see the striving language comes to us so quickly, but it's more about receiving obstacles. It's about dwelling. What can we do to step into this kingdom of God and receive that grace, receive the peace, receive the sonship, the being the daughters? Where's the unforgiveness in your life? What is it costing you?
Right. Asking that question, I think a lot of us, we wait for unforgiveness to show itself to us, and then maybe we ignore it for a while before we address it. And a lot of people say there's super positive results from being proactive and asking that very question. Where is the unforgiveness? And going looking for it in your life. And many people are surprised where they find it, but also happy that they decided to find it and do something about it. One thing I think is a little confusing is it's trying to nail down what are we actually doing in forgiveness? Like, what is it actually that I do that gets me to that place of interior freedom and interior peace?
I don't think there's a single algorithm or flow chart.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think we could definitely give people a sense of what's involved. And really, it's striking me how it's a much bigger thing in our life and in the world than it seems in the moment.
Right. Okay. So here's one thing I think we're doing in forgiveness. And we probably have to do this pretty early on in the process, is actually confront the wrong or the offense. So it's not avoiding or denying the hurt, but really acknowledging it. And I like how the name of Bishop Tutu's commission was Truth and Reconciliation. You have to have the truth. You can't whitewash the evil. If there's no evil, then what do you need forgiveness for? If something wasn't harmful. And I'm thinking about this guy, Miroslav Volf, who wrote a book. It's a theological book called Exclusion and Embrace. And he's talking about this, the two parts of a reconciliation process, which do involve authentic exclusion, which is naming and excluding the evil that is there. So the goal is the embrace of the other, but cheap embrace is not true embrace. So first you identify the wrong and the wrongdoer, and only after you confront that can you move towards embracing the person who has wounded you. And this is truth for him.
That's right. And you can't say it doesn't matter when it's a real thing. Yeah. You can't say it doesn't bother you when it does bother you. Mm-hmm. Now, Karen, of course, some things are very minor and we just let them go.
Right.
Because we're not highly reactive. But when we've suffered a wrong, we want to put responsibility where it belongs.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
And when it belongs with the other party, if you've identified some kind of wrong, and usually this isn't too hard, we feel it and our mind's pointing it out to us pretty strongly, but we go ahead and name it.
Yeah. I like that you put responsibility where it belongs, because it also indicates that you're able to step back and sort of see the whole situation and appreciate the parts that people played in it, and my own part as well as the other person's part. There's likely always some kind of responsibility I have in the situation. And also there's probably a whole complex system within which the behavior happened, with a lot of influences and relational patterns. In fact, this is making me think of a job I had for a very brief amount of time. And I did have a conflict with someone in that job. And the thing is, though, after I left, I could see things a little more clearly. And I realized there were so many complex patterns that were wrong in the whole organization that I could start to see, a lot of places where there was responsibility for this outcome or thing happening. And it helped me to understand. I mean, it was a little frustrating, because how can you fix all of those different pieces to get to some kind of a functional place? At the same time, it gave me some perspective about not only where everyone else was responsible, but there were things that I was responsible that I could have done differently in the situation.
Naming the responsibility of others is a great place to start.
Yeah.
Because usually we're ready to start with that.
Oh, we can see that clearly.
we have to figure out how we contributed to a situation, or we're doomed to repeat it more than likely.
Yes.
And this is a big challenge to us, is to put the responsibility where it belongs, let them own their part as best you can determine, let third parties, institutions, whatever, own their part, and then let ourselves own our own part.
Right. There's kind of an acceptance around naming the harm and recognizing it. So sometimes what we're doing when we're stuck is we're internally trying to change the past. We want this never to have happened. Oh, if only they never blah, blah, blah. And then we're thinking about all the alternative realities we could be living in. But there really is, like, part of this acknowledging the harm is accepting that this happened and this affects me. And yes, it changes in some big extreme examples. It changes the whole direction of your life. And that's now what we have to work with.
And accepting the harm likely means you're going to have kind of a grieving process. You're recognizing, well, that happened, and it's, this other thing didn't happen, and well, it wasn't supposed to happen that way, or whatever it is. There's a coming to terms with the reality of the harm. So grieving is not a bad word. It's a useful
word
to use.
Because usually in situations like this, there is a loss. And maybe somebody even took something from you. So I think it's a great word for working through that reality.
And that's one reason why sometimes we can't get straight to forgiveness.
Yeah.
Is we're trying to skip over some of this acceptance, some of this grieving. And our unconscious mind just isn't having it. It's not going to let all that short-circuiting take place.
That's a really good point. That really all of these things that we're doing in forgiveness need to be honored as part of the process. And in many cases, there's some setting of boundaries that's part of the process. So if I'm naming something that's wrong, or if it's even something I want to use the word evil about, then there has to be this boundary to remove yourself from the evil, to protect yourself, and then set yourself in a place of security. And that's the place from which you can do the forgiveness. For example, I don't know, if you have a relationship and the person is always crossing your boundaries and being mean, that obviously that's a judgment, but being mean, it's hard to keep forgiving unless you're setting the boundaries. So often you need to do the boundary work first and then give yourself the space for forgiveness.
Absolutely. Forgiveness is not overlooking the harm.
Mm-hmm.
It's seeing the harm, it's highlighting the harm, and it's dealing with it. So, of course, creating some kind of boundary is often what's needed so that you can, all that process can take place. Creating the boundary, Karen, it's so helpful. Our brains, they desperately want to learn from events and situations. This is, I think, often a big reason it's hard for us to let something go. And it's why we have an instinct to keep picking up the situation and turning it over and looking at it, because we're trying to learn from it. Our unconscious mind helps us all the time. It does learning all the time, constantly. And creating the boundary means that we've done an important part of that learning.
That's a really good point. I have seen very clearly that part of why your unconscious mind can cling to those negative emotions sometimes is because it's like, well, if I let go of that, then I'm losing the learning and I'll just have the same experience again. And once you can isolate the learning, then it's like you can release all that emotion because you've got what you needed from that experience.
And part of the learning then that feeds into the story. And this is, I don't think we talk enough about the importance of story and narrative in our lives. We're story-making animals, and the stories we tell about ourselves are very powerful. And
so,
in forgiveness, we're changing the story.
Interesting. So you would say you're actually shifting what you're telling yourself and how it fits into your life. So it's like you're making a new narrative about the experience.
Yeah, who I am and what happened. This is how we make sense out of the world, is we tie these events together in meaningful ways, and we have stories and narratives. If we find out that we've got a new story about what we learned and who we are, and we're able to remember the situation without a lot of heat, then we've really done a lot of work. And we know we're there, or we're getting there to forgiveness.
Yeah, it's like a way of knowing you're making progress in this whole thing.
Yeah, we're transforming the experience, and transformations, that's a key concept in Christian life, is we're being transformed. We're being conformed to the mind of God all the time.
So I think another way maybe that you're making progress is when you can start to tap into the compassion or empathy for the humanness of the person that you feel like wronged you. So sometimes we can start pigeonholing people or putting them in boxes. We see them as the enemy, or maybe not quite that extreme, but we put them into our labels about who they are and what they're like. But when we can start to see their dignity as a person, step into their shoes, or see their perspective, that's a sign that things are starting to loosen up and we're making progress.
Yeah, naming the harm, accepting what's happened, it's part of anchoring the whole situation in a reality, because we can often just project a bunch of fears and angers and everything else on the person that's done us harm. That's human nature.
Right.
And we can create the monster, which can be out of proportion to the truth of the situation.
Right. I think, too, there's a shift that happens in forgiveness from seeing ourselves as a victim or having a victim mentality and moving to a place where that does not define you and you're stepping out of being the victim. That's not who you are, and that's not how you approach life.
And of course, Karen, there are people that are victims, and they're horrendously victimized. At the same time, are they going to be defined by that victimization? Is that going to be the story that they tell themselves their entire life? Is there going to be a place where they're ready to change the perspective and acknowledge, well, I am a victim, but I'm not going to have a victim's outlook on what's happened to me.
Right. Okay. So Curtis, this has been kind of a lot that we've come through today. Do you have a takeaway? Do you have something that's sticking out to you?
Well, Karen, all of this season, if you will, it's really reinforced the importance of forgiveness. I think I didn't appreciate the centrality of this to our Catholic lives. The how to get this done has always been a big challenge to me. It's a big process, Karen.
Yeah.
And having the boundaries, having the acceptance, and having a new story, that's all part of it. So it's creating insights for me.
Right. I think for me, one takeaway is this is really worth doing. This is really worth investing in. And there are a lot of people who have their procedures and processes around forgiveness. There's a lot of ways to do it. And it's worth deciding to do it, deciding to enter into that process and do what it takes to get the benefit from forgiveness. Thanks for being with us today, everyone. We would love to hear if there's something specific that has helped you in your forgiveness process. We know it's very personal and individualized, and there's lots of ways to do it, and we'd love to hear what's worked for you. So go ahead and shoot us an email at thecatholicmidlife@gmail.com, or hop onto Facebook and post in the Catholic Midlife Podcast Facebook group and let us know about your experience.
We would love to hear from you, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. It's great to be here with you. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite app or platform. Leave a review. That's so helpful so that others like you can find the podcast. And be sure to tell your friends. We'll see you next week.